welcome to the Three Inning Fan Show with me, Kelley Franco. I am so excited about our guest here today. Anthony DiComo has been covering the Mets since 2007. He's also an analyst on my favorite baseball show, Baseball Night in New York. And he is the co author of The Captain with David Wright. Anthony DiComo, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Kelly. That's my favorite baseball show too, by the way.
Well, there you have it, folks. I think we all agree it's the favorite baseball show. Anthony, give us a vibe check on the Mets right now.
Well, it's a heck of a lot better than if we had been recording this show about 2, 3 weeks ago. This was a team that looked like it had completely lost its way. And don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of work to do. The Mets are not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination, but they have been playing better, so the vibes are better. Quite literally, the vibes are better. There was, when they were going through that 12 game losing streak earlier this year, and even some of the losing that followed after that streak ended, you would go in the clubhouse after games, and it would be, um, you just got the sense that the team felt defeated, and rightfully so. They were literally defeated, but it has been better of late. Some of these rookies they have brought on from Carson Bench has been here since opening day, but AJ Ewing coming up has made a big splash more recently this week. Nick Morabito. You get energy when you get younger players, and the Mets are winning again. They're winning more than they're losing these days, which is always good for the quote unquote vibe check. So yeah, just a better atmosphere in general for this team.
It seems like Benj has found his footing. I mean, you just referred to him as a rookie, and then you kind of, you checked yourself and you're like, well, he's not really new. He's been here. But in a way, it is kind of like he's new because he hit that home run on opening day, but then he went quiet for a while. And just in the last couple of weeks, he's really picked it up.
I guess that's the sliding scale that we're all looking at, right? Because Benji almost feels like a veteran now. He's very much a rookie. He's got less than 2 months of big league experience, but he was here on opening day, whereas someone like AJ Ewing, who's made a huge impact on this team already, has only been here for a couple of weeks. And he's the veteran compared to Nick Morabito, who only just got here, and Zach Thornton, who's pitching against the Nationals, who only just got here, and this isn't the way the Mets drew it up. Not that they didn't want these rookies to be part of their plans, Benj especially. They did want to be part of their plans on opening day. But this was a very veteran team, and if the Mets had, if things had unfolded the way they wanted, they'd have Luis Robert and Jorge Polanco and Francisco Lindor and all of these injured players in their lineup now, which probably would be blocking some, if not most, of these rookies. But they're not. The rookies are taking advantage. Like you mentioned, Bench hit a home run on opening day. More or less disappeared for a month after that, but he's been really, really good. It seems like 2 or 3 hits every single night over the past couple of weeks. I know that's an exaggeration, but it really does feel that way. He's leading off games now. He's playing every day against righties and lefties and is really developing before our eyes into the type of player that the Mets had hoped he could be.
That's amazing because I know the future was so bright for him, and I'm just really excited that it is unfolding right in front of us. And he has been part of the plan for this year. I mean, Stearns said he's going to be our center fielder, and he stuck with him. And for a while, I kind of thought, does he need to go back down? But they stuck with him, and it's working out.
Yeah, and if you go back to spring training, if you remember, the Mets signed Mike Tauchman about midway through spring training, and it sure felt for a while there like Tauchman was going to win a job. Maybe both of them would make the team, but Benj wouldn't get this sort of everyday run of playing time. And then, like you said, he slumped. There was a really bad stretch there for him for a while, and had the Mets had other options, he probably would have gone back to AAA. They didn't really have other options given all the injuries that they had, given the lack of other prospects coming behind in the minors. There just wasn't a lot that they could do. So they stuck with Benj. He managed to fight his way through it. He managed to get out of this slump, without having to go back to the minors. And now, the Mets are looking a little bit like geniuses for it because you never want to send a player back down if you don't have to. A lot of times it does become necessary. We've seen it over the years with lots of high profile prospects, Francisco Alvarez, Michael Conforto, There's others I can't think of off the top of my head, but it's not always linear for a player, especially even for a top prospect. And Carson Bench was a top 50 prospect in all of baseball. He was the Mets' number one overall prospect. It's not always linear for these guys. They don't always just come up and succeed right away and then get better and get better and get better. But for Benj to sort of figure out that learning curve as quickly as he did and go through a 3-ish week slump, 3, 4 week slump and bust out of it all on his own and now look very much like a bona fide big leaguer who deserves to be in there every day. Yeah, that's a real credit to him. It's a real credit to the Mets, player development, both at the minor league level and the major league level that he's able to do this, and they've needed him because without Carson Bench, they'd be in a whole lot more trouble than they already are.
Besides the youthful energy, what are some other signs that a turnaround could be percolating?
Um, I think the biggest thing the Mets have going in their favor is the fact that there aren't a lot of spectacular teams around the league. I know the National League is doing far better than the American League this year, but even within the National League, yeah, the Braves are playing great, and the NL East is probably out of play for that reason. The Phillies are playing better, but they stumbled out to almost as bad of a start as the Mets, which kind of made the whole thing just a little more palatable for the Mets and other teams who are going to spend this summer now chasing those sorts of teams. So don't get me wrong, the Mets have dug a hole, but you look around and those two teams I mentioned, you've got some of the teams in the Central that are trying to claw their way to a playoff spot, but no one is like gangbusters. Formidable to the extent that you say, oh, the Mets aren't going to be able to catch them. No, I think to the contrary, you talk to people about the Mets, and I think the general consensus is if they can just hang around and have themselves in a place where they're even approaching 500 by mid-season, then all of a sudden, you start flexing that Steve Cohen muscle. You start talking about what they can add at the trade deadline. You start getting some of these stars back, like Francisco Lindor, first and foremost, into your everyday lineup. And the whole operation just looks a lot different. And you can certainly see a scenario in which the Mets could rally, could get one of these many wild card spots that are up for grabs in the National League. So, I think that's probably one of the best reasons for optimism beyond anything they have going on in their roster is the fact that you don't have to be all that good to put yourself in position to get good at the end. We saw it in 2024 with the Mets, right? They didn't quite have a 12-game losing streak early in the year, but they certainly didn't look good in April and May. And then lo and behold, they were the best team in baseball over the second half of the season, and they rode that all the way to within a couple of wins of making the World Series. So it can happen. I know there's a lot of cynicism out there because of what happened last year, sort of the reverse. The Mets were the best team through early mid-June and then wound up missing the playoffs by a game. So it's a long season. A lot can happen. And if the Mets develop in the way that they hope they can, we'll look back in August, September at this early stretch, and it'll almost seem like it was a totally different team.
It would certainly be extraordinary if they could fight their way back and the watered down playoffs give that opportunity. In fact, over in the American League, you're looking at a situation where you could have a sub five. If the playoffs started today, you could have a sub 500 team in the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly. And that's to me, when I look at teams that get off to poor starts, it's less about does this team have enough time to make it up? Because pretty much every team in baseball right now has enough time to make it up. To me, it's more, can you put yourself in a position where it makes sense to add at the trade deadline? So the Mets wound up, if the Mets can do that, then like I said, the roster, everything looks completely different going down the stretch. But if they can't, and if they really stumble over the next month or so, month and a half, June, early July, that sort of thing, and they're still 10 plus games under 500, they're still trailing 6, 7 teams in the wild card race. Then, as a team official, you look at the roster and say, yeah, we're still technically alive, but why are we going to waste resources on this team that hasn't really shown us anything, that hasn't really shown us an ability to overcome adversity, to do the things they need to do to get there, and maybe they're not healthy enough still at that point. There's a lot of reasons not to add, right? Especially when you see how much these young players, these prospects have impacted the club. Do you want to give up more of them in trades that may or may not help you get over the hump? So again, to me, it's the season within the season. You just need to get yourself to a point where you're around 500. It makes sense to add. It makes sense to transform this roster in a way that can take you to the playoffs, versus the opposite, which is this might just not be our year. Maybe we trade Freddie Peralta. Maybe Clay Holmes gets healthy and we trade him. Maybe we go down the line. It becomes a very different conversation if you can't do that over the next 8 to 10 weeks.
Would you envision a fire sale at the trade deadline if they're still like where they are now?
Well, we saw it in 2023 with this club, another very expensive veteran-laden club, and that was a little different because the Mets had brought on so many players on one-year deals. Yeah, and guys who are on expiring contracts, Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, you go on down the line. Tommy Pham was part of that. This is a little different. The Mets don't have a ton to sell. Clay Holmes would have been the piece, but now he's going to be out until probably August. So that severely detracts from his trade value. Freddie Peralta is the piece that would make the most sense that could get you a big haul. But other impending free agents like David Peterson stands out as not having a good year. And, had he been, he could have gotten you something. You just go on down the line. There's not a ton that the Mets could trade that would bring them back surplus value. But yeah, if you get to that point and the choice is try to play it out when you have a 10% chance of making the playoffs, or say trade Freddie Peralta, restock the farm system, get something of real value for him, and fortify yourself for 2027 and beyond. I think there comes a tipping point where it always becomes realistic that you have to consider doing that. The Mets are not there yet. They're not even close to there yet. They're very much looking at this as we're good enough, despite the injuries, despite everything that's happened, to go on a run and potentially even to add at the deadline. But we'll see again what the next 8 to 10 weeks bring.
Yeah, from the past couple of weeks, I have felt kind of a new energy, but it seems to me that Clay Holmes' injury was such a gut punch. And it was actually a gut punch on two levels. Number one, they lost their best starter, in my opinion, their best starter. I think he's better than Peralta, and I think he's arguably better than McLean. And certainly after McLean last night, that was not a great night for him. But they also, as you mentioned, they lost what could have been a very valuable trade chip should they be sellers at the deadline.
Yeah, and you know, I can't say enough good things about Clay Holmes from a Mets perspective. You mentioned better than Peralta, better than Nolan McLean. To me, it's not a matter of better or worse. It's a matter of consistency, especially in today's game where pitchers don't go deep. And both Nolan McLean and Freddie Peralta have been guilty of this, where even on their best days, they're frequently not making it out of, or not going longer than 6 innings, sometimes not making it out of the sixth inning. Um, Clay Holmes was doing that pretty much every time. He was the Mets' best bet to get into the seventh, to complete 7 innings, which, by old standards may not seem like a lot, but by today's standards, that is. And very few guys were doing it as frequently as Clay Holmes, forgetting even the success that he was having, the low ERA, the fact that he was winning games for them. So yeah, that's a huge blow to the rotation. It's a huge blow to the consistency of a team that needs to win as many games as possible right now. Good starting pitching is the best way to do that, obviously. It's a blow to the bullpen, which becomes more taxed when guys are not frequently going 6, 7 innings. So, and then one aspect that you didn't even mention, Kelly, is just the veteran presence, the leadership. Clay Holmes was a big voice in that room. He was a part of what was going on, and he's still here, but it changes the tenor when a guy's not on the field and incapable of performing. So that was a huge blow. And then yes, the trade deadline aspect. It's kind of funny because if Clay Holmes had been healthy, the Mets' chance of making the playoffs would have been greater. Now that he's not, it increases the chances that they might sell off at the deadline. And yet he would have been not just one of, but the biggest piece they had to sell. So it's a double whammy for sure. Terrible injury for Holmes, a freak thing. Pretty amazing that after he gets hit by that 111-mile-an-hour comebacker, he still faces 7 more batters in the game before
Crazy.
leaving. I don't know if that's even toughness so much as it's just adrenaline and no idea what's going on, but it does speak to the competitor in him for sure.
So we're recording this on Wednesday morning, and we are with the great Anthony DiComo, who has covered the Mets for longer than some of you people have been alive. So it's Wednesday morning. We have Zach Thornton going tonight. Tell us a little bit about Zach.
Yeah, the Mets had an interesting choice to replace Clay Holmes in the rotation because there wasn't a perfect solution. I think the name that a lot of fans, at least that I saw, wanted was Jack Wenninger. He is outside of Jonah Tom, who has really struggled at Syracuse and wasn't an option for that reason. Wenninger was the Mets' top pitching prospect. He's got really good stuff. He recently had a 16 something inning scoreless streak. Looked every bit like the type of pitcher you would want to call up, and yet there were some, I would say, yellow flags there. The rate was really high. He'd had some control and command issues. I think there was some skepticism within the Mets organization that Wenninger was quite ready for the big leagues, and that's exactly what you want to avoid if you're the Mets, especially in this stretch of 16 games they're playing right now in 16 days. If you have a starting pitcher who's wild, who's all of a sudden out of the game in the second, third inning, the Mets bullpen is already in a little bit of dire straits right now, so would have been an issue. For that same reason, they decided not to use Tobias Myers, was stretched out in spring training, but is no longer stretched out. Wouldn't have been able to give you more than three plus innings, despite the fact that the Mets obviously like Myers. He's been a big part of their bullpen. Didn't make the most sense at this time. So ultimately, they went with Zach Thornton, who is not, the most headline grabbing prospect on earth, mostly because he doesn't throw hard. He's going to sit 92, 93. But what he does do exceptionally well, better than almost any pitcher in the minor leagues, is he throws strikes, the lost art of throwing strikes. This guy's old school. He's a left-hander. He can command. He can put the ball exactly where he wants to more often than not. So despite the relative lack of stuff, um, it's his skill set gave the Mets confidence that he can come in and be that guy who's not going to blow up, right? Like maybe he gets hit a little bit if he's too in the zone, but he's going to give you five, six quality innings. It is, like I said, an old school profile. You'll see him throw a bunch of different pitches. He relies on his slider a lot, but he can throw five different pitches, and I'm sure we'll see them all on Wednesday night. Uh, Exciting prospect for that reason. For me, I like watching guys who throw strikes. I think a lot of baseball fans do. We've kind of, as a game, gotten away from it because everybody values stuff and how hard can you throw and what are the metrics on your breaking pitches and all this. Not that Thornton doesn't have that stuff, but it's not to the level of some of these other guys. What he does well, like I said, is pound the strike zone over and over. And that, for the history of baseball, has always been the most important thing.
I had Terry Collins on the show last week, and we talked about old school baseball, and it really makes you long for the day. So hopefully, we will all enjoy Zach's performance tonight. Anthony, do you think this is his slot to lose in the rotation, or is Stearns going to go shop for a replacement?
Yeah, I think it's entirely up to Zach Thornton right now. If he pitches well, he's going to continue pitching. The Mets don't really have an obvious alternative right now. It's a little early to go and acquire a starting pitcher, and like we discussed earlier, I'm not sure the Mets have put themselves in a position where they necessarily deserve to have their team go out and acquire one. They need to show a little bit more. The other options coming through the minor leagues, whether it's Tong or Wenninger, as I said, are not ideal right now. So, in a perfect world for the Mets, they would love for Zach Thornton to go out and pitch well and clearly earn himself another start. Um, that being said, this is not just an unlimited runway. If he goes and struggles, then yeah, the Mets will look at another direction for sure after one or two starts. So this is very much up to Thornton. It is an opportunity for him, and we'll see how long he can run with it.
I have to say, Anthony, I really appreciated your coverage of the Mets, especially during that 12-game losing streak. It must be so hard to do your job and do it well, but also keep the relationships with the players. I mean, I just have to say, you didn't sugarcoat anything, and I really appreciated it because I think a lot of people in your position would have tried to, and you didn't. And I think you were really loyal to what you do for a living.
My job is to deliver the news, deliver the facts. I've always seen it that way. I think, when things are not going well for a team, people think I'm negative. When things are going well, people think I'm positive. And the reality is, I don't really think I'm either. I try to be unbiased. I try to, um, give it to people straight. It can be difficult, sure, when the team is not doing well and it feels like piling on. But a 12-game losing streak is a 12-game losing streak, right? No one's happy with it. And what I've always found and what I find in, reading media coverage of other people, I don't want to hear that things are great when they're not. And nor do I want to hear about all the problems when things are going well. I want to hear it straight. So that's what I try to do. And I think there's always going to be a segment of fans that um, think reporters are too positive or too negative. As long as I'm getting people telling me that I'm both, which tends to happen, I feel like I'm probably being pretty fair and down the middle. So that's what I get. And I've found in my experience, players, coaches, managers, executives, they appreciate fairness. They don't expect you to carry their water for them. Um, they expect you to tell it like it is, to be fair, not pile on, but be honest and open and deliver what's going on with clear eyes. So that's really all I try to do. I appreciate the compliment. To me, it's the baseline requirement for the job.
How are things in the Mets clubhouse these days? As fans, we hear different things about the clubhouse chemistry, Soto, Lindor, friction. What's fact and what is Twitter fiction?
I mean, look, to me, this is always the chicken and the egg question. Like, what comes first, winning or chemistry, chemistry or winning? To me, I've always found that winning breeds chemistry. I think that's the real order of operations. So yeah, the Mets are playing better and the chemistry is better. And I think it always helps when you've got youthful energy in there, as we talked about earlier. So having guys like not just young guys like Benj and Ewing and Morbido and Thornton, but guys who played together in the minor leagues, came up together, are around the same age, were drafted in some cases in the same classes. So have gone through the system together. I think that always helps in bringing some of that together. And then you've got older players, like you heard Juan Soto say the other day, um, reiterate, I should say, the other day, that part of the reason why he committed here to 15 years was, yes, of course, $765 million, but he believed in the long-term vision of what the Mets were doing with their farm system, with their processes in-house, all that sort of stuff. And you kind of see it now with some of these young kids coming up. And, Carson Bench has a walk-off RBI in the Subway Series on Sunday against the Yankees. And who's the first person out of the dugout but Juan Soto? So you can see him being invested in some of these younger guys like Benj and Ewing, and you can hear in his voice when he talks about them that, he sees them as a ticket to winning baseball for the Mets. So that's all good. Uh, regarding the Soto Lindor stuff, it's a little different these days because Lindor isn't playing, and that always changes the dynamic. I think both of those players kind of addressed this in spring training. They're on fine terms. It's not like they're mortal enemies. It's also not like they're best friends in the entire world. I think anyone in that clubhouse would say the same thing. They're two really good baseball players who can coexist just fine. And, Juan Soto, trust me, wants Lindor back in that lineup because he's one of the best players that the Mets have.
David Stearns made a statement to you a couple of weeks back on Mendoza, and he said, and this is when things were looking a little worse, he said, quote, "We don't view this as a manager problem and we don't intend to make a change." If I were to kind of look at that and look at the words "we don't intend," would I be reading a little too much into that or thinking that there was some wiggle room in that statement?
There was some wiggle room in that statement. If David Stearns wanted to say Carlos Mendoza will be our manager for the rest of the year no matter what, he would have said Carlos Mendoza will be our manager for the rest of the year no matter what. He didn't say that. And I think the reason for that was not because he's looking down the road and saying, gee, if things go bad, I want to fire Mendoza in September. Like, no, no, no. The reason for that is because you don't know what's going to happen over a baseball season. The fact of the matter was, Stearns believes exactly what he said, that this was not a manager problem. This was due to roster construction, injuries, things that are David Stearns' fault, things that are beyond his control. There's never one reason, right? But if you rank out the reasons why the Mets lost 12 in a row and were so bad in April, and um, I think Stearns would probably put Mendoza pretty far down the list. He loves Carlos Mendoza. He loves the way that he operates within the clubhouse, the way he handles the media in New York, and all the things that go along with it. The last thing that David Stearns wanted to do was fire Carlos Mendoza or feel like he had to. But yet, when you lose games, as often as the Mets were losing games, the noise, of course, gets a little louder, and at some point it becomes too much to ignore. So in early May there, it did become too much to ignore, not in the sense that Stearns felt like he had to fire Carlos Mendoza, but in the sense that he felt like he had to say something. So that's where the statement came from. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, I think you always, as an executive, want to leave a little bit of wiggle room because you don't know what happens. Maybe the Mets lose another 18 in a row coming down the stretch here, and it just becomes difficult to justify continuing with the operation that you have. That being said, there was no sinister intent there, because, like I said, in David Stearns' perfect world, Carlos Mendoza will be the manager of this team for a long time to come.
Because Mendoza's contract runs out at the end of this year. How meaningful is that to you that it runs out and it has not yet been renewed?
I don't think that's all that meaningful to me. Teams tend not to make those decisions, especially with managers who are not, super accomplished. Carlos Mendoza has only been a manager for a few years. He has, it's not like he's got 5 World Series titles to his name. So teams tend not to extend managers before they have to for just this reason, right? Like you don't know what's going to happen. You could have the type of season you don't expect, and then you've committed yourself to a guy you don't want to. But like I said, there's a lot of respect and appreciation between Stearns and Mendoza, and it would I would guess, and this is not me reporting, this is me just saying based on what I know about the two guys, I would guess that in David Stearns' perfect world, once again, uh, Carlos Mendoza will still be the manager of the team next year, and Stearns will be able to exercise that option and all of that because it is a partnership that he would like to continue. Sometimes these things are not, um, sometimes these things go in ways you don't want or hope or expect because of the way a team performs, but that's not the way Stearns is looking at it right now.
Well, and a couple of weeks ago, we were wondering not only about Mendoza's job, but about Stearns' job. So I'm glad things are looking up across the board.
Yeah, and that's the nature of this business, right? Things can change very quickly. It's a little more complicated when you talk about executives. There's so much that goes on over the course of a season, that it's tricky to replace an executive in the middle of the season. David Stearns also has a 5-year contract, unlike 3 for Carlos Mendoza. So it's it's certainly something you would tend to look at more in the off season versus the middle of the season. But the Mets are winning again, so these conversations have gone to the back burner for sure.
That's the way it goes. Anthony, you have been so generous with your time today. And I am ready, if you are, to close this show up with our closer question. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Okay, so here at the Three Inning Fan Show, our other love in life besides baseball is food. And so
Me
we
too.
close. Oh, good. All right. Well, we're Italian American, right? DiComo, I'm
That's
guessing.
right.
All right.
Yep.
See, it's in our blood. So my question is, Anthony, when you are watching the ball game, and it can be when you're at the ballpark, which is probably where you usually are, or if you're at home on the couch with nobody bothering you, what your favorite food to eat is. Anthony DiComo, what's good to eat while watching the ball game?
I'm a little basic in that I love the Shake Shack at City Fields. I definitely will frequent there over the course of a summer, especially a day game. It just hits right with lunch. But um I also just love the old school sausage, peppers and onions, hot Italian sausage, peppers and onions on a roll. I feel like they do it right at City Fields. It's one of the cheaper, more filling, but also just delicious things to get there. So that's my answer. It feels like summer when you're eating that.
Oh, yeah, that's good stuff. Do you have a regular order at Shake Shack that you get?
Double Shack burger and fries.
Yeah,
Easy.
that's good stuff. They
And then
make a
and then I
good.
want to go into a food coma for the first 4 innings.
And since I do have another Italian American on the show, I have to ask you because it's my standard Italian American question. Do you call it sauce or gravy?
We grew up calling it sauce. I know some people, go with the Sunday gravy and all that. I have no criticism of that, but we grew up calling it sauce in my house. I don't really know why.
Yeah, I'm a sauce family too. Paisan. Anthony, you have been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you'll come back sometime.
Thanks, Kelly. Of course, anytime.
Thanks, fans. We'll see you next week on the Three Inning Fan Show. Bye bye.